As a spy, I spent 3 years undercover in the Golden Triangle, and finally, the extraction signal came from my handler and boyfriend 5 minutes. That's all it would take for us to go home together. Then his voice cut through my earpiece cold as ice. Plan B. I have to go save Nightingale. She's been compromised. She's my ex-girlfriend. Stay under your covers still intact. You're safe. I snapped the earpiece. In two walked over to the drug lord. I just hogtied and spoke to him in a language he'd understand. Let's make a deal. I'll take out your competition. The air was thick with the smell of blood and wet earth. My name is Vera. I'm a top operative for the Phoenix Intelligence Service, codename Sparrow. I'd been undercover for 3 full years in the most dangerous stretch of rainforest in the Golden Triangle. Today was the day it all came together. Spread across the clearing in front of me were a dozen of Mateo's men, all of them dealt with, and Mateo's himself, one of the 3 most powerful drug lords in the Golden Triangle. My primary target was bound, tight against a tree with specialized rope. The look in his eyes was pure terror and confusion. He couldn't understand it. The woman he trusted most, who'd been by his side for a year, had turned on him without warning and done it with terrifying precision. I ignored his stare and glanced at my watch. 5 minutes until the scheduled extraction. My boyfriend Derek, also the commanding officer on this operation, would arrive at the rendezvous point in 5 minutes. With his team, he'd take me and Mateo out together, then we'd go home. I ran my thumb over the plain steel band on my ring finger, feeling calm. Derek had given it to me 3 years ago, he said. Once I finished this mission, he'd replace it with a real ring. Static crackled in my earpiece. Then Derek's voice came through. Vera. Do you copy? Copy? I answered. My voice was rough from years of keeping it in check. Nice work. Stick to the original plan. Meet at point A in 5 minutes. Understood. I watched Mateo. He seemed to catch something from my earpiece. The despair on his face was immediate. Everything was going exactly as planned. But just as I reached up to cut the line, Derek's voice came back. There was something in it I'd never heard before. Hesitation, conflict. Wait, Vera. My stomach dropped. Headquarters just sent through an emergency alert. Luna's cover is blown. She's in danger, trapped inside Victor's territory. Luna, Derek's ex-girlfriend. I didn't say anything. I just listened. The air felt like it had stopped moving. I have to go get her. Derek's voice went cold and flat. She's my ex. I owe her. I laughed silently to myself. So being an ex-girlfriend outweighed the life of a current one. What about us? I asked. My voice came out quiet. Vera, listen to me. There was an edge of impatience in his tone. Now you're safe right now. Your cover hasn't been blown. Mateo's already neutralized. All you have to do is stay under and wait for new orders. Safe. I looked around at the bodies scattered across the ground, then back at Mateo, who was glaring at me with pure hatred. He was telling me I was safe here in the middle of a drug lord's compound, seconds after a firefight. This is an order. All emotion drained from Derek's voice. Execute Plan B. Plan B. A plan he'd never once mentioned to me. A plan built around rescuing his ex-girlfriend with me as the acceptable loss. I didn't give him the chance to say another word. I reached up and pulled the tiny earpiece free inch by inch, slow and deliberate. Then, while Mateo watched in stunned silence, I took that small device, the one that had carried every order, every promise, every piece of my loyalty, and snapped it clean in half. The line went dead. I walked over to Mateo, crouched down, and met his wary, searching eyes head-on. I spoke in the local dialect, the one he'd grown up with, the one that left no room for misunderstanding, one word at a time. Mateo, let's make a deal. I'll take out your competition, Victor. The look on Mateo's face was something else. It moved through shock, then suspicion, then just barely visible beneath the surface. A flash of wild excitement. What makes you think you can? He asked. His voice came out rough, strained from the ropes cutting into him. Because I'm the Phoenix's top agent and you're my leverage. I said it straight. I didn't give him time to think. I grabbed the knife from his belt and sliced through the ropes, binding him. Your men will figure out something's wrong soon and come looking. We don't have much time. I stood up and dusted off my hands. Mateo rolled his wrists, working out the numbness where the ropes had cut in. He looked at me with an unreadable expression. What do you want? Direct. That was one of the things I liked about him. I want to survive, and then I want revenge. My voice was calm, but only I knew what kind of rage was burning inside me. But then I added something I hadn't planned to say. I also want to find someone. My handler told me my mother was killed in a raid 3 years ago, but I recently discovered she's still alive, and Derek knows where she is. He's been using her as leverage to keep me compliant this whole time. Mateo's eyes narrowed. You're telling me your own organization has been holding your mother hostage to control you? I nodded for 3 years. Every time I questioned orders, they'd send me a photo of her in a different location. Every time I got too close to the truth, they'd threaten to move her again. I thought I was fighting for my country, but I was just fighting to keep my mother alive. Mateo was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised me. I know what that feels like. Victor has my sister. He's been using her to control my supply lines for 2 years. I stared at him, the realization settling in. We were both prisoners. We both had someone we were trying to protect. We could either keep fighting each other, or we could work together and free both of them. Mateo extended his hand deal. I shook it. It didn't take long before Mateo's men followed the sound of gunshots and found us. When they saw Mateo standing there unharmed with me at his side, everyone froze clean. This up, Mateo pointed to the bodies on the ground and gave the order to his right-hand man. Nothing happened here today. Yes, boss. I followed Mateo back to his base, a fortified compound hidden deep in the rainforest he gave me, the cleanest room available, and told me to rest. First, I didn't argue after 3 years undercover. It had been a long time since I'd slept properly. But just as I was about to lie down, there was a knock at my door. It was Mateo's right-hand man, a guy named Raul. Madam, the boss asked me to give you. This Raul handed me an encrypted satellite phone. We'll use this to reach you when there's news you already. Have something, I asked? Raul nodded his expression a little. Our people dug up some information about Luna. Turns out her so-called cover being blown was nothing, just a minor skirmish during an arms deal with Victor's crew. She barely got scratched. Barely got scratched. I repeated those words in my head. It felt like a sick joke over a scratch. Derek had thrown away a 3-year operation and thrown me away with it over a scratch also. Raul continued. The Phoenix's deputy director, Silas, just got off a call with Derek. My stomach tightened. Silas was Derek's direct superior and one of the most cunning operators inside the Phoenix. What did they say? Silas told Derek he fully supported the decision to cut you loose, his exact words. Raul paused. Sometimes you have to sacrifice one to protect the whole. Sacrifice one to protect the whole, how noble. So that's all I was to them. The one they could throw away whenever it was convenient. I gripped the satellite phone so hard, my nails were nearly digging into my palm. Got it. I shut the door and leaned back against it. My legs gave out and I slid slowly to the floor. This wasn't abandonment. This was a setup, a complete and total setup, one that my lover and my own organization had built together just for me. I stayed at Mateo's compound for 3 days. I didn't do anything during those 3 days. I just ate, slept, and let my body recover. Mateo didn't bother me either. He gave me space and treated me with respect on the 4th day. Raul came back with the latest intel, madam. We intercepted an encrypted exchange between Derek and Luna. He handed me a tablet. On the screen was the decrypted transcript. I skimmed through it fast, and with every line I felt something inside me sink a little deeper. Derek Vera might not be dead. Nothing's come out of Mateo's side. Luna, she has to die. She knows too much. A living sparrow is a massive liability for us. Derek, I know, but I didn't think you'd actually go through with meeting Victor's people just to make my plan B look convincing. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? Luna, if it means getting rid of her and having you back, it was worth every risk. I couldn't read any further, so even the so-called cover blown had been Luna's own, doing a scheme she'd staged herself and Derek, my lover. My partner, hadn't just known about it. He'd been part of it. What chilled me even more was the conversation that came next. Derek. I've already reported to the higher-ups that Vera leaked part of the operation route during the mission to capture Mateo, which caused the mission to fail. Now, everyone inside the organization believes she's a traitor. Luna, so when is she going to die? Derek, I've already arranged it. I tipped off Victor's people in advance about one of the possible routes Vera might take during the capture operation if Mateo doesn't kill her. Victor's people will. So that rainy night, those cold shots that nearly took my life, they weren't an accident. They were a trap set by the man I loved with his own hands. He didn't abandon me. He wanted me dead. I switched off the tablet and handed it back to Raul, my face completely blank. Thank you, madam. Are you? Raul looked at me, stopping himself before he could finish. I'm fine. I forced the corners of my mouth into something. That wasn't quite a smile. I just want to kill a few people. My existence had become a threat they couldn't ignore. They would stop at nothing to get rid of me, and I couldn't just sit here and wait to die. I went to find Mateo. He was cleaning his gold-plated rifle when I walked in. He didn't look surprised to see me come to a decision. He asked, I want to know what Victor's been up to lately. I got straight to the point. Mateo paused what he was doing and looked up at me. He's been swallowing up several of our operations, and he cut into one of our supply lines. With the South American buyers, what, you thinking about going after him? Know your enemy, and you'll never lose a battle. I said. Mateo smiled. I like the way you think. All right, whatever you want to know. I'll tell you. I want to know what kind of connection he has with the Phoenix. Mateo's expression shifted, you think. Victor has someone inside your organization? Not think, I said, holding his gaze each word, deliberate. I know. The fact that Derek could so easily leak my operation route to Victor meant the two of them had already built a secret line of communication long before any of this, and Luna walking straight into Victor's territory, getting into danger, and then slipping out completely unharmed. That was no coincidence. There was something much bigger buried underneath all of this, and I was right in the middle of it, a pawn they could sacrifice whenever it suited them. Derek and Luna came for me faster than I expected on the 5th day. Raoul brought news, madam. The Phoenix has sent a 6-person elite squad into the Golden Triangle. The one leading them is Derek's most trusted mancode named Hound. I let out a cold laugh. The Phoenix's resources were supposed to be used against enemies. Instead, Derek was turning them on one of his own, his current girlfriend. It was like someone stealing your house and then beating you with your own furniture. The irony was almost impressive. You're their target. Mateo sat across from me, his expression serious. I know what's your plan. They think I'm the prey. I'll show them who the real hunter is. I met Mateo's eyes, my gaze steady. Mateo, I need full intelligence support from you and your best team. He didn't answer right away. He just watched me like he was weighing something. I knew what he was thinking. The intel I'd given him before had impressed him. Sure, but it wasn't enough to make him go all in on me. I needed something bigger, something that would make him willing to walk through fire for me. I took a slow breath and spoke. I know where Victor keeps his biological weapons research files. Mateo's pupils, shrank. Victor had been secretly developing a weaponized strain of a tropical virus capable of decimating entire populations. The research files contained not only the formula, but also the names of every buyer who had already placed orders. Those files were the ultimate currency in the Golden Triangle. Whoever possessed them could control the flow of biological weapons to terror groups, warlords, and corrupt governments across 3 continents. How do you know that? Mateo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because when I first came to the Golden Triangle, I didn't just work as Victor's accountant. I was assigned to infiltrate his bioweapons program. I helped design the encryption for his research database. I know exactly where the backup servers are located, and I know the access codes. Mateo stared at me, the greed in his eyes undeniable. He knew that the virus research files could make him the most powerful man in Southeast Asia, not just a drug lord, but a kingmaker, a man who could sell protection from the very plague he controlled. Why should I trust you? He asked. You don't have to trust me, I said, standing up. I just have to give you the one thing. Victor can't buy a way to destroy his enemies without firing a single bullet. The canopy of the Golden Triangle did not offer shelter. It only trapped the wet, suffocating heat the rain had stopped an hour ago, leaving the forest floor a swamp of slick red clay and rotting vegetation that clung to my combat boots like wet cement. I pressed my back against the buttress roots of an ancient banyan tree, my breathing shallow, rhythmic, and silent in my hand. The weight of a customized, suppressed pistol was a familiar, comforting presence. Raoul Mateo's right-hand man was crouched 50 yards to my left, hidden beneath a canopy of wild banana leaves. He held a thermal imaging scope to his eye, his finger tapping a silent sequence on his radio transmitter. 3 clicks. They were close. Derek's elite recovery squad. The cleanup crew was moving through the ravine in a tight military wedge formation. I recognized the lead man immediately by his heavy, deliberate stride and the way he swept his rifle. Hound. He was Derek's personal fixer, a man who had spent 10 years burying the Phoenix's dirty secrets in shallow graves across 3 continents. He thought he was tracking a rogue agent, a woman soft from 3 years of playing a drug lord's mistress. He didn't know he was walking into a kill zone designed by the person who had set the training standards for his own unit. I waited until the second man in the wedge stepped over the tripwire I'd buried beneath a layer of wet ferns. Click. The low, dull thump of a directional mine echoed through the ravine, followed instantly by a horizontal storm of steel ball bearings that shredded the thick foliage and the first 2 operatives in a fraction of a second. Ambush. Hound roared, diving behind a fallen log as his remaining men opened fire, their automatic weapons chewing the canopy to pieces in a frantic blind panic. But I was already moving. I slipped through the dense brush like a shadow, using the deafening roar of their own gunfire to mask my approach. I appeared behind the 3rd operative just as he was reloading. My knife went in clean sliding between his 2nd and 3rd ribs, severing his aorta before he could let out a gasp. I caught his falling rifle, pivoted, and fired a precise 3-round burst into the chest of the 4th man who was trying to flank Raoul's position. Hound. I called out, my voice flat, carrying clearly through the sudden ringing silence of the forest. Your wedge is broken. Your men are dead. Throw down the weapon. Behind the log, 60 yards away, there was a long, tense silence. The only sound was the dripping of water from the canopy onto the blood-soaked earth. Vera Hound's voice came back raspy and filled with a sudden, tense disbelief. You're supposed to be running. Derek said you were compromised hiding in the brush. Derek is a fool who lets his ex-girlfriend write his operations, I said, stepping out from behind the banyan tree, my rifle pointed steadily at his cover. And you're the idiot who believed him. Toss the rifle over the log, or I'll let Raoul test his new thermal-guided mortar on your position. A second later, a black rifle was tossed over the log landing with a soft, muddy thud in the ferns. Hound stepped out, his hands raised, his face pale and covered in sweat. He looked at the bodies of his elite squad, then at me. The smug, professional arrogance he usually carried was completely gone. You're a traitor, Vera, he whispered, his jaw tightening. The deputy director has already signed the burn order. There's nowhere for you to go. I'm not going anywhere, Hound, I said, gesturing for Raoul to secure his wrists. I'm staying right here, and you're going to help me write the next chapter of the Phoenix's history. The cellar of Mateo's fortified compound was cool-smelling of damp stone, spent brass, and the dry, sweet scent of stored tobacco. Hound sat bound to a heavy wooden chair, his wrists secured with thick military-grade zip ties. A single lantern hung from the low wooden ceiling, casting long, flickering shadows across his battered face. I stood before him, tossing his decrypted tactical radio onto the wooden table between us. Derek's currently at Victor's compound, isn't he? I asked, pulling up a chair and sitting down, my eyes locking onto his. Hound spat blood onto the stone floor and let out a dry, rattling laugh. You think you can take Victor in his own fortress? He's got 200 armed mercenaries and the backing of the local warlords. You're dead, Vera. Even if I don't kill you, Silas will send another team and another. Silas won't be sending anyone, I said, sliding the tablet Raoul had given me across the table. On the screen was the decrypted transcript of the exchange between Derek and Luna, along with the financial ledgers of the offshore account Silas had opened in the Cayman Islands accounts that had received $10 million from Victor's shell companies over the last 6 months. Hound stared at the screen. The defiance in his eyes slowly turned into a cold, hollow shock as he read the lines. Derek and Luna, he whispered, his voice shaking. They set up the whole operation, the Luna rescue. It was a scam. It was a theater, I said, leaning forward. Silas needed a reason to liquidate me because I was getting too close to Victor's bioweapons research. He knew that if I stayed undercover for another month, I'd find the paper trail linking his offshore accounts to the virus shipments leaving the port. I tapped the screen, so he let Derek and Luna play their little high society game. They made me the scapegoat, framed me as a traitor, and sent you their most loyal hunter to silence me before I could present the evidence to the director. Hound closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling slowly. The realization that he had been used as a hitman to cover up the corruption of his own superior seemed to crush what was left of his professional pride. I didn't know, he muttered, his voice cracking. I thought I was bringing in a traitor. I know, I said, reaching down and slicing the zip ties on his wrists with my knife. That's why I'm letting you go. Hound looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. You're letting me go? Take your radio, I said, pointing to the device on the table. Go back to the border. Contact the director's personal security unit. Give them these files. Tell them that Silas, Derek, and Luna have sold out the entire Golden Triangle division to Victor. I stood up, my posture perfect, my face expressionless, and tell Derek that Sparrow is coming for her mother. Victor's fortress was situated on a sheer cliff overlooking the muddy, turning waters of the river. It was a massive concrete structure surrounded by triple-layered razor wire, thermal cameras, and armed sentries who patrolled the perimeter with trained attack dogs. But every fortress has a flaw, and for this fortress, it was the underground fuel storage facility, a system I had helped design 3 years ago when I was working as Victor's accountant. At 2 a.m, in the middle of a torrential monsoon storm that turned the jungle into a deafening gray chaos, I didn't launch a frontal assault. Instead, I sent a single encoded message to Victor's personal satellite phone. The message was simple. I have the bioweapon files you've been looking for 3 years. Meet me in the jungle clearing north of your compound alone, or I release them to every news agency on the planet. The bait was irresistible. Victor had spent millions trying to recover those files. He would come. I positioned myself in the abandoned logging camp 3 miles from Victor's fortress. It was a maze of rusted machinery, collapsed buildings, and overgrown vegetation, perfect for what I had planned. I set a series of shaped charges along the main support beams of the largest warehouse and wired them to a detonator I held in my hand. Then I waited. Victor arrived with 30 men, not alone, as I had demanded, but I expected that Derek and Luna arrived with him too. A betrayal within a betrayal. I watched them fan out through the camp, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Vera, Victor's voice echoed through the rain. Show yourself. I stepped out from behind a rusted tractor, my hands raised, the encrypted hard drive held above my head. You want this, Victor? I said. I want to know where my mother is. Victor laughed, a cold, cruel sound. Your mother, she died 3 years ago in a raid, just like you were told. I shook my head. I know she's alive. Derek told me. Derek's face went pale in the darkness. Vera? I never said that. I said you can't trust anything he says. Victor sneered, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years. A voice that made my heart stop. Vera. A woman stepped out from behind Victor's men. Her hands bound her face, thin and tired, but unmistakably my mother. Mom, I breathed. Victor smiled. Now you have a choice. Vera, give me the hard drive and I let your mother go, or refuse and watch her die in front of you. I looked at my mother, then at Derek, who couldn't meet my eyes, then at Luna, who was smirking with triumph. And then I smiled. I already gave you the hard drive. Victor, you're standing on it. Before anyone could react, I pressed the detonator. The shaped charges I had planted weren't in the warehouse. They were in the ground beneath our feet in a grid pattern. I had mapped out over the past 3 days. The explosions didn't send debris flying. They sent the ground itself collapsing into the network of underground tunnels that ran beneath the camp tunnels that fed directly into the river. The earth split open with a deafening roar. Victor's men screamed as they fell into the churning water. Derek grabbed Luna, trying to pull her to safety, but the current was too strong. Victor himself stumbled into a sinkhole of mud and debris. I had separated the explosions to create a path, a narrow corridor of solid ground leading directly to where my mother stood. I ran toward her, grabbing her arm, and pulling her to safety as the ground behind us collapsed into the river. We escaped through the jungle, the sound of the flood drowning out the screams of the men who had tried to kill us. Derek and Luna survived the collapse. They were pulled from the river downstream by Victor's remaining men, but the bioweapon files were gone, destroyed in the flood. Victor's fortress was now isolated, cut off from its supply lines by the new channel of water that had formed overnight. 3 days later, I sat with my mother in a small village on the border. She was weak, but alive, and she looked at me with tears in her eyes. I thought I'd never see you again. I held her hand and said, I thought the same. Mateo found us a week later. He brought news. Victor's operation was in chaos. The collapsed tunnels had flooded his entire underground infrastructure. The bioweapon research files were gone, and the buyers who had paid him millions had abandoned him now that they had no guarantee of delivery. As for Derek and Luna, they had been arrested by the Phoenix's Internal Affairs Division. Hound had delivered the evidence I gave him, and Silas was already in federal custody. So what now? Mateo asked, looking at me and my mother. I looked at the mountains in the distance. I thought about the 3 years I had spent undercover, the lies, the blood, the betrayal. I thought about Derek and how I had loved him once. I thought about Luna and her smug smile that had finally been wiped away. I'm going to take my mother home. I said we're going to disappear somewhere, quiet, where no one knows our names. Mateo nodded. I understand, but if you ever need anything, you know where to find me. I smiled. I know. I didn't take the Phoenix's offer to restore my rank. I didn't take their gold star badge or their 6-figure salary. I didn't take anything from the organization that had tried to kill me and hold my mother hostage. Instead, I walked away with the only thing that mattered, my mother's hand in mine, and the knowledge that the jungle would always be a better home than the cage they had built for me. A month later, we were sitting on a porch overlooking a quiet river. My mother was knitting, and I was watching the sun set over the mountains. The war was over, the Golden Triangle was still there, but I was no longer part of its battles. Mateo sent word that Victor had fled the country, his empire in ruins. Derek and Luna were facing life in prison, and Silas had been convicted of treason. I read the messages and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no revenge, just a quiet peace I had never known before. My mother asked me one evening, "Do you regret any of it?" I thought about the 3 years of my life I had lost, the years I could have spent with her, the years I had wasted on a man who never loved me, the years I had given to an organization that saw me as disposable. No, I said, I don't regret it because it brought me back to you. She smiled, and I felt something shift inside me, something that had been broken for a long time, finally begin to heal. The jungle was still wild. The border was still dangerous, and somewhere out there, Victor was still plotting his return. But for the first time in 3 years, I was free. And that was enough.